Rebecca Rose was born in 1972 to a naval aeronautical engineer father and a German mother. She was recruited into a German dark fleet, or Nachtwaffen, when she was only 4 years old by her father, who signed papers in the presence of two grey extraterrestrials and also signed off on her brother joining the dark fleet. At age 9, she began a 20 and back program where she served for 20 years as a cyborg supersoldier, first on Mars and then later in the outer reaches of our solar system, where she was based on the Kuiper Belt facility run by Draco Reptilians. In this interview, she shares more memories and documents of her service along with that of her brother.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Welcome back, Rebecca, to Exopolitics Today.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, we did an interview back in 2022 where we went over some of your experiences and you shared some of the documentation about your father and how you were inducted into the secret space program. But since that time, you've recovered more memories, you've found more documents. So I thought this would be a great way for us to kind of cover the update to your experiences, your memories, and new documents, and then go over anything else that you think might be relevant to people trying to follow your story.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, where do we start?
Well, I think a really interesting discovery you made was that we know your father served in the US Navy. He served with a company that was later incorporated by Lockheed Martin. Now, maybe you should just kind of give a brief summary of what it was that your father did and his kind of like importance to the programs.
Yeah, I always feel like it kind of does start with him because without his connections to, he was subcontracting with NASA and the CIA through Lockheed. So he was working with a top secret clearance and all of that. I don't know how many levels of top secret. He said he had a lot of access to sensitive compartmented information. And he, over time, he was working with naval intelligence, cryptography, and these things. But he was in research and development. He was creating all kinds of different things related to satellite technology, the very early satellite technology. And I don't 100% know because, frankly, I didn't know until about a month before he died that he was actually working deeply in the classified world. He only revealed these things to me on his deathbed. Yeah.
Now, you did find a document from 1973 where it talks about, it's a company, the Saunders document, and that referred to your father working with the Special Programs Division in 1973. And this company, Saunders, was eventually merged into Lockheed. So, if you just show document number 3, Jazz. So, you want to tell us about this document and the Special Programs Division your father worked in?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm seeing that. He was always being given like accolades and, being recognized for his contributions and his inventions. And, he always said they got a lot of patents out of me. I don't know who they was, mostly Lockheed and the Navy. I'm not sure. So, yeah, he was definitely, he was a brilliant mind. He was certainly a brilliant mind. I would say that for him.
Let me read out that document because I think maybe it's a little faint. It was just a screenshot.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that on my screen. Yeah,
I'll read it out. This token of sincere appreciation is presented, or this token of sincere appreciation is presented to David Barfoot by Sanders Associates for his for recognition of effort and contribution into the success of BRD7 program, Special Programs Division, and then you have a signature and all of that. So he was working on special programs.
Now we could question what were the special programs. No idea. I mean, I actually have no idea what that, the alphanumeric value what the project was. But he was definitely an inventor who would get a budget and create what they needed over time. And I also believe he had some help from extraterrestrial sources. I'd asked him about that before he died. I said, "Were you getting help from up there?" And he kind of laughed and chuckled, and he looked away and he said, "Yeah, maybe." I don't know. And I also don't know to what extent, the deeper you go into that world, the more you are subject to certain kinds of, I believe, mind control. They own you. They owned him, and by extension, they owned his family, which is why I ended up where I did. But I don't know to what extent he was really aware, clearly conscious of what he was involved in or what he was doing at a certain point. And at some point as well, he had developed a pretty bad alcohol addiction, and through the haze of that, and merged with work and all of all the things we've talked about, we can wonder how clear his mind was toward the end of all that. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I was intrigued by, and maybe you just can confirm this, was that you found out that your father had an abduction experience involving grey ETs in 1959, and that this somehow augmented his intelligence and kickstarted his psychic abilities. Is that right?
I believe it's 52. And this is interesting. The reason that there was a lot of evidence, over time through his journals, through his relay of stories of flying and connecting with other beings throughout his childhood and throughout his adult life, that helped me understand that he'd had some kind of contact. But I had been heavily, I had been asking my guides, my team, the wider universe for information on this. What was his experience? And as during the days and weeks when I was really probing that, spiritually, psychically, I had an experience at night that I knew was really his experience. We were deeply wed, very like two peas in a pod in a lot of ways, as souls in some way. I had an experience of coming down into my body after being taken out. This was just a few years back, since his death. And it was like almost crash landing back into my physical form in bed at night. It was very jarring, really kind of frightening. I knew I'd gone somewhere and come back, but I think this was his experience. All I could think of as I lie there in bed trying to get my breath that night in the wee hours of the morning was the DC flyover in 52. I know my father was taken during that time. He was also almost 10 years old in 52. So that's an interesting corollary when I was taken as well, the same time, just before I turned 10, and he was thereabouts the same, the same era of his own life. So as a boy. Yeah.
Do you think there's some connection between him being taken in 1952 and the DC flyover?
I feel like it was a time when there was a lot of, not just stuff going on in the news, but stuff going on in our atmosphere, in our world at that point. It feels like we had a lot of contact experiences going on. Roswell, the late 40s, early 50s, that's never really stopped. But it was so, I feel like it marked a new era. There was a lot of, I think the Greys had a lot of interest in what was going on with us at that point as well. So,
interesting.
You know better than I do, but that's how I understood it was very psychically, the information came in very psychically and also very viscerally and intuitively and spontaneously about his experience. Yeah.
Okay, so your father has a military background, an abduction experience early on. Now, what I found fascinating was that your mother also was recruited into the US Army in 1962. I mean, this is a time when I don't think women were kind of like serving in the military, but here your mother is serving, and she had a German background. So why do you think she was recruited into the Army?
Yeah, right. So, and I believe it was she went right after high school, was born in 37, so it would have been the late 50s. Anyway, it doesn't matter. My parents met in the military, Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. They were married in 65. They met like, they had known each other only a month. So this is a highly unusual union because they had really, I mean, I don't recognize them as having anything in common. And from this, I understand too that she served as a really good breeder for my lab kids. They have my father's, what's going to happen with him through the deep state, military industrial complex, the Navy, and so on, all the alphabet agencies, and his working top secret with my mother's genetic inheritance, with the Germans. Like, to me, it always seemed that the Germans and Nachtwaffen, they don't mind having more Germans around. And also within my mother's bloodline, I think maybe I spoke briefly to this in the first interview we did, there was some dark ritual abuse and black magician type of energy running through the generations preceding her, coming down into the family. And I feel like that gave us this is not my prettiest side of my biography, but gave us a dark reptilian in the bloodline, which I later transmuted. Beautiful story there, but I think that was part of the allure. Why this pairing? What is going to be great about this? So my mother, to my knowledge, did not have any contact experiences. However, she was highly dissociative and had a what we could call as a dissociative identity disorder, split personality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that would make kind of sense from the perspective of what a lot of researchers have said, that there was a Fourth Reich that was established in the 1950s after the 1952 flyover agreements were reached between this kind of breakaway Antarctic German colony and the US military and the US government. And that so you had a lot of Project Paperclip scientists being promoted into senior positions, that having these breeding programs where you would have German women marrying, say, American servicemen or Americans with certain abilities and talents that destined that they would probably be very significant for the space programs, that would happen. So that kind of like makes sense.
Yeah, thank you for the reflection. I mean, as I've put all this together over time, I receive a lot intuitively, and linking these things up as it comes psychically and through memory and through various internal means, through meditation and all of this. So I kind of appreciate your eyes on the situation, and you have so much research and background knowledge around all of this. Yeah, it's actually helpful to me.
Right. So your father's he served with the U.S. Navy. He served with this company Sanders, and now in 1983 he gets an honorable discharge from the Navy, and that was only a year after you were brought into the program, after he signed you over. So I guess the question is, after he signed you and your brother into this Dark Fleet program, I guess he left the Navy and then he goes into Sanders, this company Sanders, which eventually gets merged into Lockheed Martin. So that was a sign that he's going from military service, and now he's going to be a corporate contractor, and he's going to be involved in monitoring these programs, which you and his son as well are involved.
So just a little correction on the dates again. I think the chronology is, like I was taken in 82. So at that point he'd started working with the Naval Intelligence, late 70s, 77, 78 or so. In tandem with Naval Reserve. He'd come out of the Army in the 60s where he met my mom. So the Navy piece didn't come till later, but he'd been working with Sanders, which then became Lockheed he was there for over 20 years, within that company.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So essentially, then the whole time where you were serving in a 20 and back program, your father was working for Sanders slash Lockheed
Yes.
Martin in special
100%.
projects.
Yes. Yes. All the way through that. And it was shocking to me to find that out. Like, my jaw like fell to the floor, and I felt like I needed to lie down when I was like linking this up. Like, wow, I had no idea. I feel so stupid that I didn't realize that. But at the time, I was a kid. And then those guys are trained to be completely mum. Like, he was the kind of guy who you wouldn't know a thing about what he was doing at work, or where he traveled all the time. I never really knew where he was headed, or what he was involved in, and to have that so deeply hidden right in front. As we say, the truth is right in plain sight, but you just don't see it. Right, it's right there. It was a little bit shocking. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very important that we kind of like emphasize this, because people are always saying, well, where's the proof? Where's the proof for these people claiming to be in secret space programs doing 20 and backs? And that in your case, you found out that you were signed over to this kind of dark fleet Nachtwaffen program, and that when you began service in, I guess, 1982, that your father was in the process of being discharged from the Navy and going to work in a company called Sanders that was merged into Lockheed Martin,
Yeah.
and he
Yeah.
worked on special projects. To me, that's evidence that he
Mhm.
not only signed you over, but he was probably involved in monitoring your progress and your brother's progress.
Mhm. That potential is certainly there, isn't it? It's a little painful to look at, but yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this takes us to a handwritten note by your father where he's discussing neurological processes and psychic abilities. So,
Yes. Yeah. That note, yeah, I was kind of floored when I found this, because there's a cryptic kind of quality to Dad always wrote with a mechanical pencil like an engineer would. That's what he was, and he left all these notes behind on like backs of envelopes and old napkins, and this kind of thing where he was hashing things out. Why he saved that, I found these things going through his stuff after he passed away, was like, what is this? This is connected to sending and receiving telepathic information, implantation in the brain, and these things. Like, wow, I don't even know. I look at that and it's like it's written in another. I mean, granted, I'm not an engineer. I don't have an engineer's mind, but it was striking to me, what I could intuit from the script, from what he had left. Yeah. I don't know. It seems like some kind of relevance to mind control of the masses is what my awareness kind of locks into on that note. Yeah.
well, what I see from this note is a connection between the kind of abilities you described you had and excelled at in the secret space program, these psychic abilities, that you had those, and that your father is showing evidence here that he's a specialist in these kinds of kind of like advanced abilities, psychokinesis and so forth, and that he's working at that time on special projects for Sanders slash Lockheed,
Yeah.
and so that kind of supports that in some way he was aware of what you were doing and monitoring
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. 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 And I feel, as we're speaking to this, again, not like the prettiest part of my family history, but my father's alcoholism didn't start until I returned from the 20 and back when I was 10 years old. Like, that's when things became, bad with alcohol and got progressively worse. And I can't help but think, what was he trying to escape from? What, guilt, remorse, suffering internally, what knowing, did he have that he was trying to kind of, what demons was he nursing and trying to keep at bay? We can guess, I suppose.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So the alcoholism began when you ended your 20 and back program around 2002. Is that right?
No, I mean, I conceive of the program being, kind of exiting stage left. So, I'm taken in 82, and I feel like I also come back in 82, though I've been gone 20 years at that point. But the drinking was when I was in chronologically, I'm 10 years old in 82, and that's when that started. So if that makes
Okay.
sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess the excessive drinking, you think that might have been to
It's
hide
so connected.
your guilt
So
you were
connected.
feeling?
So connected to, I think, everything that was going on in the classified world. Like like I said, once you're in this deep, you can't go back. There's no door to go anywhere but deeper down in. And I'd looked through his papers and found him applying for other work later after this had all ended with Lockheed and the Navy and these things. And he had said, as a memo to an employer, anything that's not connected to military intelligence in the classified world was what he wanted in his job. Like, I don't care what it is, I don't want to do this anymore. So we can see from that he wants out. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Now, one of the kind of pieces of new information that you've gotten since our last talk was you were able to correspond with your brother and find out about him also having an abduction experience and also being involved in a gifted children program. So yeah, you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, good. You're honing in on all my jaw-dropping moments. Like, well, so my brother now, we're in touch. We have a decent relationship, but he's not somebody who wants to go back and talk about ETs and all of that. I don't think he considers himself much of a believer, even though he spent his entire childhood reading sci-fi and drawing aliens and spaceships. But I had probed him on, his drawings and these things, and shared a little bit, just, kind of trying to see if there was a place where we could begin to talk about this. I'd said, a little bit about my experience, shared some ET drawings of mine from my adult life now. And he said, yeah, I had experiences where I was mute and trying to, I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, and I felt like I was in this dream I was having. I was being lifted out through the top of the house. This happened on a few occasions. And he kind of dismissed it as just, this is a dream. I said, were there any extraterrestrials? He's like, I don't know if I believe in that. And there the conversation ended. But I think in you've seen probably the documentation of the screenshots that I took of the dialogue with my brother going back and forth through the text messages, and him saying, do you remember when they tested us for ESP, as we called it back in the 70s when we were in the gifted program? I'm like, I don't remember that, but glad you do. So so he has some, he's so innocent too in how he brings these things up, because he doesn't know I'm kind of data mining him a little bit, or looking for a little more juice to the story. Yeah.
Okay, so here he describes in this text message. Do you want to read it out, or should I read it out for you?
Yeah, read that out. Read that out.
Okay, so I'll read it out. This is what he replied. You obviously asked him a question about aliens, and he said, quote, "No aliens that I recall, though the very real feeling, dreaming, of floating up out of my bed, lights on but dim, in my childhood was recurrent and incredibly vivid. I would ascend to about 5 feet above the floor, listening to mom and dad watching TV in the living room, or perhaps in late night silence, and move as though pulled by an unseen hand out of my room, down the hallway and up, never but through a door. I was always terrified, trying to shout but unable to find breath. The dreams were not long, and I often would remember little else until I would shout long and loud enough in the dream to actually wake up, ramping up a gurgle or loud sigh into a scream, very suddenly, strange, repetitive, but no aliens." What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, that's an abduction if there ever was one. I mean, I was in the other room experiencing the same thing. So I was shocked, and in a way, Michael, kind of relieved to read this, because like it sort of corroborated my experience. And to be frank, with all of this, sometimes I have a little part of me that's like, none of this is possibly able to be true. None of it's, I'm just going to sweep it off into the dustbin in the corner, and that's going to be that. Like I have a part of me that just wants to live a normal life and have all of this stuff be wrong. However, and that's like a really honest answer, but it helped me kind of give credence to my own story in a way, which I need. So I was, and this, remember, is like we haven't talked. I don't know if he's found my videos online or been to my website, or is aware of something called the SSP. I don't think that's in his mind. So this is coming from a really innocent place. I don't think he knows that I do interviews like this online and so on and so on. So it's trustworthy information without front loading.
But it makes sense that, I mean, you had your abduction experiences. I mean, you were 4 years old. You remembered being abducted, and that your brother was also being abducted. And of course, your parents are deeply involved in this as well, with your father being abducted
Yeah.
more than 20 years earlier.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And this has fascinated me for a long time. That it feels to me that these things can run in families, like psychic ability and contact experiences, and the up leveling of consciousness that goes on, and the deeper involvement with the unseen world, multidimensional reality, kind of runs in families. That's my impression. I don't know if that's entirely true, but I'm fascinated when it does, and like, wow, what a because we could look at the deeper journey of the soul, and what are we trying to accomplish with all of this, for humanity.
Now, I remember there was this series called Taken that Steven Spielberg, I think he was the executive producer, and it described the abduction phenomenon along the lines of this kind of intergenerational process. And it seems like
Oh.
your family is a good example of that.
Yeah, I've never seen it, but that makes me curious about it. Yeah, I know it's out there. I know there's plenty of probably documentation on that. It's incredible to me, really amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so your brother's experience kind of like is more corroboration for your own abduction experience, and also you talked about being in a gifted children's program, and your brother was also in a similar program. So here's
Mhm.
a screenshot from your conversation with him, and so I'll read it out again. So this is what your brother says to you. I recall being in the gifted program Odyssey of the Mind, getting out of classes in grade school to learn things like speed reading and ESP. I think my scores were higher as a sender rather than a receiver. Sometimes packs of cards were used, and we were paired and repaired to just send this suit, later to send or receive specific cards. Yeah, you want to talk about that and your knowledge of that.
Yeah. Right. So I don't remember verbatim what he remembers from that. We were both in the gifted program. However, he was 4 years older, so we might not have been exactly in the same classroom at the same time as he got older and was in high school. So I don't have full recall on how we were. Remember going on field trips from the elementary school that I was at in Nashua, New Hampshire, and going into um, it's like some kind of testing. It wasn't ESP testing, but a lot of things that involved, um, what did they involve? I can't even explain it exactly, but they were looking to test our attributes. However, this seemed like it was something hypnotic that was going on underground, like almost going to an underground base, like going from the bus to somewhere else and then having amnesia about what would happen there, and traveling with only a very small group of kids. And I don't know that he was there with me for that. Um, I don't. Yeah, my memory is not super clear about whether he was there, but they're looking at cognition and what you can. I think it was a little psychic testing, a little different than the sending and receiving he's describing, but similarly, how far out can you go, and how can we take your mind in a way through hypnotic suggestion or other means? Maybe we're gonna introduce some trauma to see if you dissociate, and so on. Remember let's see, the template coming in with my mother particularly would give me a high propensity to be very, very dissociative, in my, just like, hey, there's trauma happening that started when I was really young, and so my front personality would just kind of leave, and I could be more easily manipulated. And I think they were also looking at that, part of my the makeup of my mind. Yeah.
Bit to that about how this kind of MK Ultra mind programming works, where they create alter personalities that can kind of be brought in at any time just with a trigger word, and how that was used in the programs, especially during the training of children recruited in. I mean, you were 4 years old when you were first recruited, and from 4 to about age, I guess 9 or 10,
Yeah.
you are trained, and so the MK Ultra is a part of that training. So, yeah, can you talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Um, they're looking, when we can look at a selection process, like why do people end up in the SSP? One of the things they want is kids who are already pretty highly dissociative. I mean, they can abuse people through trauma and various means, to create that. But if the kid has already come in with a really high capacity to do that, I guess I've said this already. Like that's a gold mine for the people who run the agencies that run these programs, and also the ETs that they're in connection with. Is basically become an empty shell. Now, whether that's through the trauma in my family with dark ritual abuse, or what was done to me later, I was taken into actually Montauk was one of the primary places I was programmed when this was a little later, when I was 7. When I was working for Nachtwaffen, I was taken to the moon earlier, and it was more light duty gigs. And in order to send me into the 20 back, they would have had to do a little more trauma-based mind control, to create the super soldier that they were looking to build out in me, psychic super soldier. And that would happen slowly over time. Like, yeah. So with that, they'll do a lot of sensory deprivation, sexual depravity, and a lot of like keeping you in isolation in cold and dark situations. Cold, yeah, very, very cold, insufficient food, no nurturing. So whoever would come in as a programmer to kind of do dark deeds to you, you would bond with them in a very deviant, inverted way, because you would think that they were a savior. So you'd be learning to bond with those who would be programmers, handlers, perpetrators, victimizers in some way, and you would be subservient to them. I remember kind of learning this with the dark nature of my mom. Just give yourself over to the person who's doing this, because it's going to make your life easier. Don't resist, just be compliant. That's what they want. I absolutely look for that. At least that's how I understand my own kind of trajectory into the programs. Why did it look like it did? And what did I have that they might have wanted? And how did they build that out? They take the template that's already there, and then they can work it. They can, really work it to their advantage.
So in 1982, you're about 9 years old, almost 10, and you begin your 20 and back program as per the agreement that was reached between your father and these grey extraterrestrials. So you're taken to Mars, and was it the mantids, the mantid beings that you first were kind of like exposed to on Mars? So you want to tell us, what happened when you're taken to Mars, and the mantid beings, and the
Yeah, wow. So before I went to Mars, I was twinned at Great Lakes Naval Station, north of Chicago. I was twinned with a little boy named Dean, who was the same age, and we were both sent to Mars. And we kind of went on to train together in a way, psychically being trained to work telekinetically, eventually to bond and wed our minds with machines that we would pilot or navigate in some way. We were trained to be, over time, pilots who could interface consciousness with the craft, the consciousness of the craft, so we could do what we needed to do on patrol as soldiers. So the mantids I remember a lot of human interactions there, more specifically than ET, at least at the base. There was a lot of human, like more military interactions there. The mantids I remember as our surgeons and our techs and our mechanics and things, because they're so adept at fine-tune, refined detail work. They're masters of frequency healing and sound and vibration. They're very sensitive to all kinds of, like the fine-tuned detail work. So I remember waking up at one point in the trajectory of the building of the super soldier, so to speak, and having two of them over me, looking at each other, and the look they gave each other and to me was like, oh, I hope we didn't mess it up. Did this work? Like, as if they were wondering if their latest augmentation was gonna going to be okay. I mean, I say that sort of jokingly, but let's have a little levity inside of the story if we can. Yeah, and I do remember us having instructions over the years. We kind of were trained to view the mantas, the natives, as sort of target practice, which is really sad. The native mantas on Mars really, they didn't have, at least in my memory in our interactions with them, didn't have anything. They were happy to share territory as long as we left them alone, but we wouldn't leave them alone. So there's a lot of there's a lot of story there with the mantids over time, but maybe that gives a little soundbite of what that looked like. Yeah.
It's very interesting that you mentioned the Great Lakes Naval Station, because as I recall, that was also where Michael Ralph, who really was the first secret space program whistleblower who came forward in the year 2000, that he was taken there. And he says he began his 20M back from 1976 to 1996, which meant that his time on Mars overlapped with yours.
Far out. You may have watched an interview recently that I did, and the interviewers had mentioned Ralph, and I had and the Great Lakes Naval Station. I said, I had no idea that anybody. I don't look at a lot of stuff. I don't read a lot of stuff because I don't want to be front loaded. So I keep a lot of things, like maybe more than I should. I keep them at bay and don't do a lot of research. So it was actually really helpful and corroborative to understand or learn that somebody else had been taken from that underground straight to Mars. That was my experience. And again, a little point of validation, I suppose. Thank you for reminding me of that with Ralph. I mean, you're right, such an early testimony whistleblower.
Yeah, and he also said that when he was taken to Mars, he was trained to be a psychic and also a pilot. So he was a psychic and a pilot, and his psychic abilities, he said, were very highly developed. It wasn't just remote viewing and remote sensing, remote influencing, but it was also psychic assassination. And he said that part of his work involved assassinating these reptilians on Mars. So it sounds there's similarities to what you described about your service.
Yeah, wow. It does make me curious to breach the boundaries of my own limitations and maybe check out his story a little bit. But yes, did he have interactions with the native reptilian race? Not because I don't think you're talking about Draco, are you?
As far as I recall, he was talking about the Draco, the reptilians, that he was he was trained to use his abilities against them.
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
So kind of another point of corroboration there. So the mantids, you mentioned them, and you mentioned the kind of target practice that the military forces there on Mars, and we're talking the kind of like the Dark Fleet or the Nachtwaffen, that they're the dominant presence on Mars back in 1982, and that they're the dominant ones, and they were attacking these mantid bases, and that the mantids sometimes would retaliate and attack the human colonies there. So you want to explain that kind of like attack and retaliation process?
Well, so and this is again, just I can only speak to my own experience with this. I recall Dean and I in in our unit, there's usually 7 of us, and Dean and I would be doing the psychic recon, trying to look over to see, psychically what was happening in their underground domicile, their lair, the mantid labyrinth, as I called it. And again, this is probably just one subgroup of many mantids on Mars. I can't speak for all the mantids, but we were tasked in part with trying to understand the frequency fence that they had, an energetic, conscious, living form of protection around the lair or around their home. and you had to be at a certain, I understood this in the aftermath, that you had to be at a certain level of frequency in your consciousness or it would destroy you, it could kill you. And this was not seeming to be technology that the mantids themselves had made. They had built it out when they arrived on Mars. I don't know that they've been around on Mars long enough to call them native, but I believe what has been before called as the ancient builder race, or ancient architects and creators, engineers, as I might call them, left the architecture for the labyrinth that the mantis later came into and made their own. Completely out of this world, as I recall going down into the labyrinth, and had all this living light technology that helped protect them. Anyway, we didn't know that our commanders were sending us over there to find out if we would come back alive. Most of us were cloned anyway at that point. Still, super soldiers take a lot to build out and develop. They don't want to waste us. But I recall we were trying to go over there to at the end of the day, we were looking to disembowel their technology. I don't know if we ever found a way, but we did understand that it could kill us if we weren't of the elevated frequency that was required to breach the boundaries of the fence. So I remember bombing them with gases and things to ultimately wanting to control their minds. They have a kind of I don't know if we call it hive mind, or where they're all linked up in consciousness, a kind of unity field. And if you can get to the mantid elders, then who kind of control the frequency for the race, then you can control all of them. In a way, it was kind of like introducing trauma-based mind control, to get them to come work for us. How did those mantids, some of them ended up with us because we had augmented their frequency and kind of put them under a spell, so to speak, so that they would become our mechanics, technologists, and engineers, surgeons at the base. And I guess a long story short, to answer to your point about the retaliation, like, they had some help one night and gave us an extreme bombing in our own craft, ambushed us at the base in the middle of the night. And I think I had my leg blown off that night, and I have a lot of traumatic memories that gave me for many years a lot of PTSD around fireworks here on Earth, like not good in my system. And I recognize why. There was a lot of like yellow and green explosions in the sky with the mantids bombing us, again, with our own technology. So that's, like, again, running through that pretty quickly, but to kind of give a full, what were we doing to them? What were they doing to us? What does that look like? What are the nuances of that?
So you want to explain the process? I mean, you're 1982, you're taken into the 20 and back program, you go to Mars. Now, is your soul taken out of your original body, which is held in some stasis chamber, and transferred into a clone, and you go and do your stuff, and if the clone dies, it just transfers back to the original or to another clone? You want to explain that process?
Yes. Yeah. There was I always feel like they had clones at the ready, like some kind of stasis that we were kept in, like the building out of a super soldier is a lot of resources go into that, to my understanding, or as I recall. They're not messing around. So it's a high level resource and asset that they have. So they're going to spend some time backing up the system, so to speak, with clones. And the primary consciousness, I can't say that I remember where that was stored or how that piece worked entirely. What I can say, and this, would be speaking to the journey of my soul overall through this incarnation, is that I have a galactic aspect that is on I call it the Light Alliance. We could more formally say Galactic Confederation Lightship, a Syrian-built ship, living polymorphous craft, that my galactic self is in a pod there. And I experience more and more as I integrate that, these flashes every day of like being within that pod. It's very nurturing. It's very high-level light, upper dimensional, and it's preserved like something very essential in I don't know, my linear language is going to fail me a little bit here, but the soul's essence, or the me that is most true to source, is, I would want to say, preserved up there. So in a way, I would be I came in to explore, in part for the Light Alliance, what was going on at the time with the galactic slave trade and being kept safe in the process up to a point. Yes, my body, my material matter, my form would be blown up, would be cloned, would be destroyed in a lot of ways, but in a source consciousness way, I would not be extinguished, if that makes sense. So looking at the more quantum picture of all of this, with a wide angle lens.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to that kind of Syrian mothership and your connection to that. Now, another aspect of your service on Mars was that at one point you described being captured by indigenous Martian reptilians, and you learned a little bit about their culture, their spirituality, and then eventually your body is cannibalized. So you want to just explain what happened?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Gosh, on a day-to-day basis, I don't always sit with all this stuff. And when you reflect it back to me, I'm like, wow, what a journey. Thank you. So I was out on patrol and, kind of doing this boring work of patrolling in my little craft. And usually we'd be in a unit, you go this way, I'll go this way. We'll just see what's out here. Right. And I was going further and further and further from base and didn't realize, wow, my tech is starting to shut down. And I was long story short, the Draco had intervened on this particular patrol to keep me isolated from the group, keep going off, get lost. And I found myself in the middle of like a shootout where they've got these little reptilians inhabited by Draco consciousness. The little reptilians surround me in the sky in craft, and I'm being shot at and shot down. They want my soul. So there's a little intervention there. There is, because my soul, it's a soul scalping operation on Mars run by the Draco, would be the shorthand there, the short soundbite. And they want my soul because there's a your viewers know this is a huge trade in consciousness, or what we might call the soul, as well as the body. The biology can also be useful. You can match this consciousness with this body and do what you need to do. So I got kind of tangled up in that. I think it was part of my soul plan, in a way, that I would end up with this more benevolent race of short reptilians down on the ground. After I crashed, I was picked up by a race that had not been interfered with by the Draco, a subgroup of that short native reptilian Martian race. They brought me back, and this is to your point of what you were saying. They fed me. They lived underground. They were highly spiritual. They were able to. They had survived a great cataclysm, and their genetics were kind of regressed. They were able to interact with the consciousness of the planet Mars to create what they needed as far as food, water, and even light underground. And they had an amazing, they didn't have technology the way that you and I would think of craft and weapons and these things. They didn't have that, but what they did have was extraordinary spiritual consciousness. And I felt welcomed by them, even though we could say, well, what happened in the end wasn't too pretty. It's all relative to having come through a lot of abuse up to this point. So to me, it was like, wow, I'm home. This is great. They treated me more like a human, or they didn't know what I was. They'd never seen something. I don't think they'd ever seen a human, and never mind somebody who was part biology, part technology. And they wanted to know if, number one, they wanted to know if I had a soul. And they wanted to know if my biology or technology could help save their race. So again, just a really quick soundbite on all of that. That's how I kind of ended up with them. Now, I had always said I had been cannibalized for parts, and I never meant that they ate me, but more that, if you said I'm going to cannibalize an old car for parts, they took me apart to see what I was and to see if, I could help them in some way. Recently, back in November, just a super recent memory and emotionally very complex for me, I realized I had a child there. They used my eggs to help save their race, to create progeny. And so this little boy has come back to me, and I've been in communion with him, learning about his story. He's come back to me as his mother. So it's again, kind of shocking. You're just going along through ordinary life, and then bam, out of the blue, oh, I have a twin. Oh, I have a son. What the heck else happened out there? I mean, it's sort of, it's humbling. So this was very, very emotional memory that came back to me while I do a lot of floating in what's called as a sensory deprivation chamber in the dark, naked, and like highly, alkalized mineral water. The magnesium in the water helps you float in the dark. It moves my brainwave state from the beta to alpha and theta states, where I can be closer in contact with what's carried in the subconscious mind. And that's how that memory came back. And it was overwhelmingly charged with both love for this child and also like, what happened? What happened here? So another layer of the story reveals itself. But I also feel like it was, again, part of how I understand so much of my experience inside of all this and helps me metabolize and integrate it, is that it's predicated on what, my soul was wanting to explore, and also to help the Confederation. At the end of the day, I think sometimes the different groups that are helping humanity ascend are also working with different planetary consciousness, different races, not just humans and not just Earth. So in trying to save this race, they're getting at the spiritual evolution of Mars. If you let this race go and all their knowledge, that's not going to be a good thing for Mars. And it's not going to be a good thing for the ascension of the solar system in its entirety.
Kramer, he also explains a similar experience where he was captured by the indigenous Martian reptilians, and he was held captive by them, and that they were very spiritual, just as you described, that they didn't really go for technology, that they were connected with the planetary matrix. And so, he described his time with them and then how they let him go. Now, but, he says that at that time that he served for 17 years as a super soldier on Mars. I believe it was from 1987 to about 2004, and that he served on the Mars Defense Force. But he described himself as just a super soldier. In your case, it seems that you were augmented, that you were like a cyborg, and that's something that made you different. So can you describe how did that unfold? I mean, you're taking to Mars in 1982. Did they immediately just load you up with all these technological implants?
Right. Well, I don't remember the whole progression verbatim. My mind is not super clear on each moment of that, but it was the progression through which they trained us. Because remember, we're going there when 9 were kids, but it's over time where they're slowly augmenting you with chemicals and building out your psi ability, putting technology into your head, into your arm, into your biology, giving you a suit that is very conscious and living, that has all kinds of like weaponry bling within it. You're sort of connecting with it through consciousness over time. That's not something that they gave us immediately, but more like through a rigorous, they're very precise in their training. Nothing is wasted and everything has a point. They don't do something for nothing. A lot of the training that I had was also through like simulation training. They'd give us like a lot of amphetamine and then stick us in it's almost like as a cyborg, you've got so much tech that they can wire you into a training battlefield that is completely a simulation, and you won't know the difference. We were trained to fight and to kill, to be fearless and to have no mercy, which is pretty sad, but that's part of the altar that I was, there's what I would call a kill switch or a kill command that they could activate in us to turn on like the super fighter part of us. I mean, that wasn't the only thing that I was trained for as a, cyborg, but that's a piece of, I think, what they were exploring at the time. And I always felt like Mars was kind of an experimental training ground where there was always, from this person's experiences to this person might look different because they're always trying something new. Like maybe the cyborg thing was something I don't know, just hypothesizing that they were checking out for these years. Like, can this be useful, or how far can we go to augment a human form with technology before it's gone overboard? What are the outer limits of this? Can we find out? I always felt like they were experimenting with us. Yeah.
Now, when you say they, I mean, are we talking about the Dark Fleet, the Germans, or are we talking more about the Draco, that the Draco were very interested in doing precisely that, seeing how much they can modify the biology of a human to create this super soldier that they could use as a mercenary for their imperial projects.
Yeah, well, so my memory, and this may not speak to the entirety of the they that I remember were mostly human that I was, interfacing with, and I remember Americans. At this point, the Germans were very much in part of my early abduction experiences on the moon, but when I get to Mars, I mostly remember Americans. I don't know what branch of military, and then there may have been Draco in the background of that, but I interfaced mostly with like white human guys. And then, the mantids I remember very clearly. It's possible I just don't have all the memory, so that's the best I can do, and the best I can speak to that. We were not trained to, we didn't have a need to know necessarily about what was even happening to us. I would say I was an owned being at that point, and eventually traded off to the Draco later on, and very much completely owned by them. Yeah.
So tell us about being traded off to the Draco and being owned by the Draco, and I guess that's when you were taken to the Kuiper Belt.
Yeah. So toward the end of my service, when they've like kind of gotten me to the pristine, like example of what they wanted, they can, again, we're talking about a lot of resources, time, energy, money, whatever, that have gone into creating a super soldier just like they want it. They can clone it and send it off to wherever. I mean, you don't want to sell it to an enemy with all those capacities, but through some negotiation that I don't know that I was entirely conscious of what was happening. I wasn't part of the trade negotiations around, what was going to happen to me, but I'm sold off to them. And again, I will be a protector of sorts of their assets out in the Kuiper Belt. I remember patrolling a very highly advanced craft out there that put the Mars craft to shame. Like, it was so next level technology out there in the Kuiper Belt. Again, piloting, and at the time, as I recall, they had control of a large galactic slave trade hub at the edge of our solar system, and that's what we were. There were a number of us. Some were super soldiers from the programs on Mars, and some were hybrids that the Draco had created themselves. I don't really know where they all came from, but we were all kind of protecting the Draco, one of the Draco motherships in the atmosphere of what I would call Planet X out there. And they had control of a portal within this planet that seemed to be a really important way stop or connecting point with other, even, off of the galaxy, off of really off world, so a lot of memory there of, interactions with the Draco and my superiors, other people doing what I was doing, and just a very different environment than Mars. Very, very it's chilling, to be like, if the Draco are ever there and you're not interacting with an intermediary, you're interacting directly with the Draco. Like, don't make eye contact with them. I just remember looking down a lot at their feet and their legs, and hoping not to get in trouble. That was just trying to stay out of trouble, because they will send you into a heaven or a hell realm with their minds. That they can create a reality for you. If they want to punish you, they will do it. It will be virtual, and you just wish you were dead. That's how extreme their capacity to create alternate environments was, like kind of psychotronic warfare in your own mind.
So they traded you from Mars, and you're now in the Kuiper Belt. The Draco own you, and now you're a cyborg. I mean, that is something different. So, I mean, did they kind of like test you? Did they kind of like put you in battle situations to see how well you did, and how well you might? Did you actually have to face off against reptilians or Dracos at all? I mean, as part of their training?
That's a really good question. I don't remember. There was so much training on Mars. I think I got to the point where, I mean, they could just. I was so pliant at that point. Like, I don't know that there was any me left. they could just program me to do what was needed, whatever extreme type of battle situation, or however you want me to interact with the craft of the day, the pilot, the patrol craft that I had, whatever you need me to do, it's not going to be hard to get me there, because there was so much precursor and prelude to that. Like, they're getting the icing on the cake at that point. There's not a lot that they need to do. You've got a perfected object there, and they can own that and probably clone it. I don't know this is an interesting point. Like, what are the agreements when you get your hands on somebody like this? Are you allowed to clone it? Is there something that prevents that, so it doesn't come into the wrong hands? Like, I don't know, maybe you know something about that, but I don't remember there being a lot of, training. I remember a particular hybrid who, he was my commander with the fleet of patrols, and taught us a lot about interfacing with the craft and what we were needed to do. But we didn't receive a lot of other, like the typical type of stuff that I mentioned on Mars. It's like it had already been done. So they kind of had what they needed without a lot of fuss. Yeah. I do remember Germans being out there once in a while. They'd have guest Germans coming out, and they were sort of bit players. They were certainly not in control, but I do remember that they had them as guests on occasion. And I don't know what the negotiations or the alliance was about. I have absolutely no reason I would have been privy to that, but that is in my recollection.
Do you remember anything about the Germans who would arrive at this kind of Draco facility, and how they interacted with you guys, the super soldiers, I guess American super soldiers? What was that interaction like?
Yeah, I don't recall them. I mean, they were interacting with more the higher ups than the Draco that were in authority and power. They would not have had much to do with me or the rest of my team as patrols. Not any like one-on-one interactions with them. We didn't have any seniority to be interacting with a German guest, but they seem to be I had this sense, and again, we can question the quantum nature of time, that they seemed to be a little old-timey, like they were almost caught in a different era from like the 50s or 60s or something. I mean, it was bizarre. But again, I don't have extensive, I didn't have a lot of like any one-on-one with any Germans coming out there. It's like sort of seeing them in the distance or knowing that hey, the Germans are here. We could speculate, but I don't really, I don't have more information than that.
I find it intriguing how you explained that you're sent to Mars, you're there performing these missions as a psychic and as a pilot, interacting with the native reptilians and the insectoids there, or the mantid beings there, and then you're traded off to the Draco in the Kuiper Belt, and that's connected with the Dark Fleet. Tony Rodriguez, he described a similar process where he had also his interactions with the mantids or the spider beings on Mars, that he was used as an auxiliary, not as a super soldier, but then he gets traded off and goes to this Dark Fleet facility on Ceres. So it seems that seems to be a process. I mean, that seems to be a practice that people that are in these 20 and back programs, they get taken into one program. I guess you and Tony were similar. Like you were considered to be slaves, right? You would just be used by one program, and then whoever runs that program decides to sell you off to someone else.
Yes, that's very much how I, conceive of it. That was my experience. I know there's a lot of like blingy sort of seniority attached to the name Super Soldier, which is why I don't really like to use it myself. Like I would think about it as a Delta combat slave, but yeah, you don't have a free being. You're not a free being. I was not. I was owned. My consciousness was owned. Everything I did from morning to night seemed to be owned at that point, because the investment is so big. They have you. It's sort of like, the deep state owned my father. Well, these guys own me.
Right. So, and even though you began when you were only like 9, just about turning 10 years old, they owned you because your father had agreed to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's, and there's remember, I'm playing a bit of a double agent here. So I'm reminded of that as we're speaking. Like, yes, true, at a more linear level, 3D Earth-based cognition, yes, this is all true. But I would also say, in a way, I volunteered to experience these particular things, as horrific as they sound. I think it was part of the bigger soul plan for Rebecca Rose coming in. So yes, there's both those things are true.
Yeah, so you want to explain a little more now about this kind of Syrian connection? I mean, you talked about Syrian mothership and a pod where your true self is housed, and that you're part of the bigger picture for Rebecca Rose was that you would incarnate and you would be going through this. So you want to explain, what the purpose of all that was?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Well, so my earliest memory of this is, when I'm taken off into the 20 and back, or my abductions early on in childhood, I also remember it's almost like a twin abduction in which the dark side is taking me and the light side is also kind of, I don't know, shorthand might be, and this is a little clunky, but like beaming up my soul. Like part of me is really being preserved on this ship. Like you can send her off and do all the things you want, but at the end of the day, this is fodder for the soul's more illuminated journey in a pathway that I had really volunteered for from within my position on the, the Light Alliance ship. Like, I'm going to go down and help you guys out. How are you going to get the best intel? Somebody is going to go in and get it. And I know other people within the programs have also probably had very similar sort of blueprints at the soul level. So the Syrian ship is I have a mate there, Tyrion, who's a Procyon Nordic, and I'm in touch with him, and I've had a joke with him like, hey, why do you miss me? I'm right up there. He said, like, you're in a pod, you're only partly here. So kind of a funny joke there. It's kind of a mixed race group. I mean, the ship I recognize as being Syrian in its almost like consciousness, so to speak, but we've done a lot of, like, I would say, like rescue missions and kind of intervening in ways that are not really intervening in human terms. It's like we're trying to make sure we're staying on track with, the mandates to only do so much, or to do this much and not more, to not breach our bounds, right? But keeping an eye and monitoring things and helping where we can. And like I said, one of the reasons they sent me in was, the galactic slave trade is really out of control. We need to know more insider details. And that's where I came in and became, in my shorthand with myself, I would say a double agent, because I'm gathering intel as I'm going through all of that and relaying it back so they can know exactly what's happening from the inside out.
Like maybe spell it out a little bit more so the audience understands it. So 1982, you're sold off into the program. So your soul, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, your soul is kind of like, different fragments or different aspects. One fragment, maybe the bigger fragment, goes up to this Syrian ship, and you're there in the pod or whatever you're doing up there. The other fragment goes off to Mars in a clone body to do all the different things, and then you're sold off to the Draco. But these are just fragments of your soul, and so this is a way of the Syrians gathering intel on exactly what the Dark Fleet is doing.
Yeah, I think that's a really, summed up well in just a few sentences. Yeah, and I think to acknowledge that it gets hard to track with just our linear cognition. Like, we have to kind of, we're really, the whole SSP experience, really is like, okay, we have to think about this in quantum terms, which is not how we're schooled here on Earth. Like, space and time become pretty flexible and fluid, and the nature of the soul and all these things. So granted, it's not always easy to conceptualize, what is she even talking about? Like, where is time in this? And how does this, the soul's here, the soul's there, the body's here, the clone is here. So thank you for, explaining that, and also for the viewers who are kind of following along with this.
Okay, great. Well, that's important, because I think Tony Rodriguez and Niara Isley reached similar conclusions about their experiences. That,
really? Okay.
they were kind of like like spies, or really their job was to go through these traumatic experiences, but that was gathering intel for the higher level galactics to
Mhm.
learn about what the Dark Fleet, what the Draco Reptilians were doing in our solar system.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds about right. I mean, and this whole perspective has helped me integrate all of this at such a deep and also like a heart level. Like, I don't think any of this was an accident, and I don't think there's any victim at this point because I've moved through so much. Like, I can understand that, you know, it just gives me a lot of peace and freedom when I always remember to take out the wide angle lens, as I say, and like look at the soul's perspective on this, look at what you're learning, and look at actually how coming into all these memories, which has been a little, it's hard. It's hard. It's like I've said, emotionally complex, but there's been so much good and blessing that's come into my life as a result of taking the high road deep into the memory field and not running away from it, and actually taking it and I don't know, taking it seriously, but like believing my story and going deeper in and investigating rather than slamming the door and saying, I don't believe in ETs, none of this happened, and I'm just going to forge ahead with my limited view of the world that would not have been helpful to me. Like, I look at my life having bloomed in the last 5 years of having come out with my story, and like I said, gone deeper in. It's done nothing but good for my life.
Yeah, I remember talking with Tony Rodriguez in an interview about this, and I think I mentioned that to him for the first time, and it was very cathartic for him because he had always thought of himself as a victim, that all these terrible things that happened to him. But then when I explained that, well, what do you think about this possibility that you were actually sent here on a mission, that you were an agent of these high-level ETs, and you volunteered to go through all these experiences to gather intel, and that was very, very cathartic because it transformed him from being a victim
Totally.
to being like, you're this kind of this double agent, and you're gathering intel on the enemy.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, my heart feels really full for all of us, as I think about that. I know everybody has a different take on it, maybe a different soul plan, different experience. But as you're saying, Yara, Tony, myself, like, this was part of the plan. And I've learned so much. I'm always learning more. Oh my goodness. And understanding the bigger picture of what's going on, from in your point of view, let's say, to use your terminology, exopolitical landscape that we're in now, with all these different races, all these different planetary connections, and the ascension of, I would say, the ascension of the solar system and beyond. Yeah, it's like, Mm. I'm not in tragedy about all of this, although that's certainly maybe a place on a waypoint on the journey or something, but I've moved beyond that. Yeah.
So you've done a lot of work in removing the negative programming that you were subjected to, and you've connected with these white dragon energies, and you've used that to remove the programming. So I know there's a lot of people that are interested in, how do you clear the negative programming? So
Oh my
yeah,
God.
how
Yeah.
do you do it?
Yeah, yeah. So that's, I mean, that will and I work with different people, client sessions. We work to kind of undo that programming as much as possible, and the altars and these things. And it will look different for different people. But in my case, like with, I mentioned at the beginning of our talk here today about the negative reptilian energy in my bloodline. Well, that feels like, when you talk about that, gosh, it feels pernicious. Well, some years ago, I was in meditation. I'm a daily meditator, and that's part of how I got my memories back. It's not through regression, but it's through meditation, and also now the float tank. but I had this experience of a reptilian energy coming into me, and this happened day after day after day for a period of weeks, and slowly understanding, like, this is the dark becoming light. I saw and felt psychically, feel it coming through me viscerally, that the negative side that they had harnessed to interface so heavily with the Draco, who were a big part of my experience from start to finish, right? They're drawing on my bloodline. Well, it came into my body as that, but then I saw this being, like a reptilian, green reptilian, becoming slowly, like almost like breaking out of this shell and becoming this beautiful white reptilian. And I was surrounded by these again, I'm relaying experience from a couple years ago, but these white reptilian, almost like dragon-like beings, and that they relay that they're Lyran, and I feel like it's almost like you augment your DNA. I didn't know that was a thing. I had to do some research on this, but it's shifting the DNA, and I'm very much aligned with that group of white Lyran dragon energy now, which is in me, and I think why the birth of my son happened with this reptilian race on Mars, and like he's come back to really it's almost like shifting the timeline, so he can also partake of that experience within my DNA and reclaim his heritage, because I feel like the reptilians on Mars, the short indigenous ones that we're speaking of who picked me up and who are dying out, have a main line to really potent dragon energies, which are connected to Mars planetary consciousness. And let's take it a step further. I would also say that each planet has its own, almost like a dragon energy that's connected to primordial source energy, cycles of creation, destruction, transformation, and rebirth. I think it's all connected to those the dragon energies. Yeah. So that's just a piece of the integration of all the wickedness and all the tragedy. Yeah.
That's very important. That the white dragon energy is kind of like symbolic of the spirit of a planet, of the spirit of a planetary consciousness, and that as you connect with that white dragon energy, it's like you are more fully embodying the planetary consciousness that your body is physically located on.
Yeah, there is that. I mean, it's again hard to parse out in human language. It's so quantum in nature, and my language is going to fall short and probably not doing this great justice. But yeah, it's something far bigger than my human mind can really hold, but that I understand very well on an intuitive level. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's very important, that in terms of the negative programming, removing that you connect with the planetary consciousness in some way. So in our case, that would be with Mother Earth or Gaia. Connect with that, and that white dragon energy is kind of like symbolic of the very powerful energies of Gaia. It's kind of like the Kundalini energy of the planet.
Yes, that's well said. Yeah. Yes. Very beautiful. Yeah. Yes, this is true. And so, like, when I look at you, reminding me that a lot of us who've been through programs, been through trauma, we live in a traumatized world, and we're very cut off from planetary energy at a basic level, an essential level, and at a primordial quantum level. And so the deeper we connect in with that, like if you've got altars you're trying to integrate or these things, that's always going to be your ally. A lot of times, I see in clients, it's like, oh, if I disconnect from Earth and I just go up, I can get out of here, or I can do what I need. I can just blast open the crown. But then you're more susceptible to staying within levels of darkness that you actually want to transmute. So yeah, a little plug for that. Yeah.
And is that why you moved to Alaska? I mean, because Alaska is a place. Well, if you wanted to get in touch with Mother Earth or nature,
Yes.
Alaska would be a great place to do that.
Yeah, there's a couple things that I've said before in other interviews. Like I feel, we're coming. We're in January, we're in deep winter here. I love the cold, dark remoteness in those kind of places on Earth. Remind me of space. I feel like it's the time spent on Mars, the time spent on in the Kuiper Belt, like these places that are like, they're in a way kind of desolate. I'm very drawn to them. I think there's a little bit of pathology in that, or I think it's, let's say it a different way, I think it's redolent of the programs. Where did I spend many, many years in cold, desolate sort of environments? And that appeals. Or the great, on another level too, I would say, it allows me to tap into my own spirituality at a deeper level. And wherever nature and the wild is really intact, we do have the ability to connect even more, maybe more easily to connect with the fidelity of planetary energy of fidelity that we have, reconnect that link like an umbilical cord from self to nature to deeply embedded codes within the earth. Yeah. So there's a lot to my Alaska story, but I certainly feel like it's supportive of deep practice and also recollection of memory and doing the work that I do with others. So
Now, you had quite a revelation about your father who passed away, I guess, in 2020, not all that long ago. That I guess in one of your videos, you described him returning, or you having a vision of him or an encounter where he's a tall grey from Zeta Reticula who said that I am 6. So yeah, you want to explain what all that means?
yeah, I always felt years and years, I felt like he was star-seeded from somewhere, and it came in psychically. I understood this almost like he was communicating it to me, that he was from Rigel. And like after he died, I did see, had this gray coming around, which I was very careful about, interacting with any kind of Draco or regressive, at first glance, like be super careful about that. But it was like he was going back after death to some kind of more benevolent inheritance of maybe how I've spoken about going back to some seed essence that's benevolent with the white Lyran dragons. Also going back, we can trace to a more positive, very, very old ancestor to some of these really regressed races and bring them back to that source point, which is, I feel like what, as the grace of had an exodus from our location, our neighborhood, some of them going back and like reclaiming what we could say in shorthand might be like reclaiming the light, going back to source or going back to something more benevolent, that's their choice. Yeah. So that's how I understood that.
Okay, so your physiological father was a tall grey starseed from Rigel, but
he ended up in Rigel, but I think originally from Zeta somewhere. Back, if you like look back in the back in super old history, probably coming initially from Zeta. Okay, they've been so tampered with; it's hard to tell what's original, right? Like with so many different groups of gray. Yeah. But I think that's also how he was, when we talked about like, hey, did you have help from upstairs as you were figuring out your, mathematical equations and technology for the deep state? Yeah, I think you had some help. I think part of it was in you, but you had some light family that was, feeding you some intel, that's my impression. Yeah.
Yeah, and what did when he identified himself as I am 6, why did that seemed to have some significance for you?
I don't know about the name, particularly. Yeah, I didn't, because I think it took me a while to recognize that there was a connection there with my father, that I really didn't want to be there. It was kind of emotional, because I'd had that gray coming around and like, oh yeah, there's something there. Yeah.
It's very interesting. So he was a Zeta Reticular starseed who incarnates on Earth to go through this life, and you are a Syrian starseed who comes here to kind of like live a life kind of like as a double agent. So that suggests that that there was some sort of pre-life soul agreement reached between.
Well, I feel like, do we go back into the galactic wars? Like, how far back do we go? I feel like that is relevant to something again, way back that my human mind is going to get all tangled up in trying to understand. But from a more quantum level, if we go back and back and back through time, then we look into the Orion Wars and these things like, oh my God, it's beyond what I can really comprehend, just as with my human computer, really. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So it's very complex. All right. So I mean, what is it you do now? I mean, to help people who, or maybe want to know how to recover their own memories. I mean, are you doing courses?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah. Well, I have a course starting here January 16th, just in a couple days. You can join me for 10 weeks live to go into meditation and multidimensional intuitive development and a lot of channeled guided journeys and things that, really help us reclaim our personal inheritance. But I do a lot of one-on-one sessions with starseed coaching and readings and quantum healing, inner child integration, which can be a little bit of alter integration. I wouldn't say I'm in the habit of giving people their memories back, but more creating a situation in which the person is more able to release the blocks that are keeping memory at bay. So assisting so they can get the memories back themselves. I think that's a little more, in line with what I do. But helping people who've been through abduction experiences and people who are just looking to understand, like, hey, what am I here for? Time is going back and it going on, and I'm, whatever inquiry you have, whether it's large or small, that's something we can look into. And I count myself as fortunate in that I'm able to use for good for my own personal development, my own spiritual journey of the soul, the gifts that I was taken out of here for. The psychic ability came back when I started to meditate in a really devoted daily way back in 2012. So I'm able to help other people using that, and that's that's a huge win for me. I'm super grateful for that. Yeah.
Okay, so your website's RebeccaRoseBarfoot.com. So we got that up on the screen. And you also have a YouTube channel. So you want to tell us what the YouTube channel is?
Yeah, Rebecca Rose Sirius Blue on YouTube. Same thing on Telegram. And on my YouTube, I have published a full series of Bringing Light to the Darkness videos that go into great detail, almost excruciating detail, over the years, of me bringing forth a story and all its minutiae. You can go and watch that series if you want to know more about my journey. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to you remembering more about your journey, and maybe next time around we won't wait almost 2 years to do a follow-up interview. We'll get together a bit quicker. So I want to thank you, Rebecca, for being on Exopolitics Today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been it's sort of heartwarming to revisit all this with you. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.